Hello, I'm Eric Snodgrass, and thank you for watching today's long-range U.S.-focused forecast video brought to you by Nutrien Ag Solutions. This analysis is being provided for perspective only, and any decision made based upon this presentation is the sole responsibility of the person making the decision. Finally, please remember that all long-range weather forecasting is speculative by nature. Well, I wanted to begin with a quick recap of one of the major features we've been focusing in our forecast videos this week. This was yesterday around midday. You're looking here at the Central Illinois radar base out of Lincoln, and it's an amazing squall line. The south edge of it was all the way down to St. Louis, with the north edge there going through northern Illinois and Chicago. And along the leading edge of this squall line of thunderstorms, we saw a lot of damaging wind. Now, if we were able to avoid the damaging winds out of this system, this gave it a great drink of water. Saw some locally heavy amounts, but broadly across this region, at least 1/3 to 1/2 of an inch of rainfall. And that was an important component of this squall line as it moved through, giving it a much-needed drink to a very dry corridor here in parts of Illinois. Now, if we just take a look at what this storm system looked like, this is a picture taken by a colleague of mine, Matt Reardon, here at Nutrien Ag Solutions, and he's showing us what we call a stack of pancakes. So sometimes on the leading edges of these storms, we can see these what look to be more stable layers of the atmosphere sandwiched up as the main downdraft pushes out ahead of it, producing the shelf cloud. He caught a better view of it right here. It's incredible to see this. I think a lot of folks from St. Louis clear to Chicago got to see something like this in Illinois in the day yesterday on Tuesday. We did get some damage out of this. Overall, we saw over 340 reports of severe weather, many of those from this squall line as it went through right through there, through parts of Iowa, Illinois, and Indiana. And Todd Wiedekamp, also another Nutrien employee, took this picture for me here in Galesburg, Illinois, which is on I-74. But the bigger picture with this storm system is this: if you avoided, the severe aspect of it, one thing we do notice is that over the last 24 hours, this particular corridor here, right in kind of the heart of the Corn Belt, certainly saw some much needed rains as we get here to this midpoint in August. In fact, if we even add this just to what we've had over the last 3 days, there's been a pretty large sector of the United States here that was in need of quite a bit of rainfall that got it. And when I add that to this forecast, okay, this is early this morning, around 6 o'clock in the morning, we were watching a large region right through here of widely scattered showers and storms. The overall, forcing in the atmosphere is a broader front that is moving in this direction. And what I want to show you here is just looking out over the next 60 hours or so. There's that complex of storms. You can see that a lot of parts of Iowa, but certainly Missouri, Illinois, Indiana, parts of the Ohio River Valley, watch it again, have a decent chance at some more rain, as do parts of the Central Plains. You can see here multiple rounds maybe coming through parts of eastern Kansas again. That is, of course, a region that doesn't want any more rainfall. And we even see that over the next couple of days here, parts of the Pacific Northwest are going to be getting in on some of the rainfall as well. So this is just a quick forecast looking out over the next 60 hours. I'll give you a much more detailed forecast about this in tomorrow morning's update. But this is the bigger picture, I think. When we add the rainfall that we've just recently received to what the European model's picking up on the next 10 days, here's what it looks like. And overall, the picture that is being painted here is that there is, another large swath through the middle part of the country that's going to be getting rainfall. The system first comes on shore here. You saw that a few moments ago with some rainfall coming into parts of the Pacific Northwest. That's kind of uncharacteristic for this time of year. That system then moves through parts of the Canadian prairies, and as the broader front out ahead of it dips farther to the south like this, we do see a resurgence of moisture here. So there's going to be plenty to work with in the high plains to produce more thunderstorms there. You can see that because of the position of that boundary and the moisture axis, which again runs up like this, there is a section right in through here which has been extremely wet over the last month. That's going to continue to get more rain out of this. As the front pushes through and cools off the Great Lakes states and parts of the Northeast, we will be seeing, places maybe in northern Illinois, northern Indiana, Ohio, and Michigan that stay on the drier side of these next couple of systems here. And there are some folks in there that are really hurting for moisture. But certainly this is going to be viewed as a continuation of a wetter pattern. We still see a feature coming out of the Bay of Campeche, moving right up here along the Gulf Coast, and we are watching for some tropical development right over here. I'll show you that in just a few minutes, staying off of the East Coast of the United States. Just to show you some multi-model agreement, I'll go straight from here to the GFS. And you see a very similar picture being painted. So decent model agreement on the overall picture of things moving through the next 10 days on the whole. So this is where we get to. I want to step back and I want to ask myself a question here. If we have taken precipitation off the table for a broad section of the United States that's needed it, and now start to look at some of the other factors, I think our main player moving forward is to have a discussion more about temperatures. So I want to show you this. So far in the month of August, what have we featured? We featured a dominant ridge that sat right here over this part of Alaska and between Greenland and the Hudson Bay. All right. In fact, our flow pattern across the open Pacific Ocean has been quite a mess. It's not as though it's been flowing quite regularly. And what I mean by that is, look, we've had a trough here, a ridge over Alaska, a trough here that's kind of come out and given us weak flow across the United States, but also another ridge sitting to the south. But we call this a high over low over high pattern. That's given us some weak flow. It's given us a Canadian storm track, and it's also allowed for some cooler air to be setting up here in the north central Canadian prairies, getting up into the much closer here to the North Pole. Now, what has that done in terms of our temperatures? We'll take a look over here. Over the last 15 days, that has allowed this particular sector to cool off, while the weak flow doing something like this has kept the southern half of the United States on the warmer side of things, especially here over parts of Texas and New Mexico, getting over to the lower Mississippi River Valley, where temperatures at times have been quite extreme. We've talked a lot about that. This has been the setup, and this is where we're going by the end of this week. We do see a little bit of a change. Now, let me show you the major changes I'm seeing. So this is by the 25th of August. First of all, this little trough that you see sitting right here off the Aleutian Islands is one we're going to have to pay close attention to. There is a ridge here just north of Hawaii, and the flow is doing something a bit more like this. Now, when you get over here into the north central plains, you do see that a piece of the jet stream seems to go up like this, and another piece tends to dive down like this. But I want you to focus a bit more on this trough and this trough, because with time, these two features are going to be able to work into the north central plains once we get to the end of this week and beyond, and they're going to sweep right down in through this section of the country, cooling things off. So the first frontal passage is here. That's cooled off parts of the Northeast and parts of the Eastern Corn Belt, but the bigger, cooler push is coming very soon. And it appears as though we've broken down a little bit of that kind of wacky flow that we had over Alaska and just to its south. But the bigger picture is this. Where do I see this pattern going by the time we end August? Well, there's a few clues here. The things I want to pay most attention to are kind of the spokes off of the hub. So we'll call this the hub right here. And one spoke is going to be this trough that you see sitting here off the Aleutian Islands. A second one is going to be the ridge that is here along the western part of North America. A third here is this trough that kind of digs down into the Great Lakes states. And a fourth is the ridge that we see here coming off over there by Greenland. Now, this is through day 10. Now, there are other pieces of this across the northern hemisphere, but what I'm most concerned about is where this is taking us. So through the next 5 days, we can see the cooler air coming in here as the heat stays on in Texas through the Four Corners states. And as that first trough sweeps in and then makes its way up to the Canadian prairies, parts of the Pacific Northwest are cool. But look at this, by days 5 through 10, that trough I had drawn for you right here, well, it is now sweeping into the north central plains, cooling off a region that really needs warmth. We need to extend our growing season here. And the question is, how long does this last? Well, before I answer that question, I at least want to show you some multi-model support. So this is an analog technique that we're now using that looks at the top 105 analogs. Those are historical weather days that correspond to the 9 to 11 day pattern. And we certainly see the cooler weather coming in at that point, even as we get out here to days 12 through 14, really occupying much of the central and eastern part of the United States, while the west coast goes back over toward warm. Continuing, take a look at this. This is now getting you out through the first 5 days of the month of September. And at that point, we really see that the warmth is confined here with the cooler weather setting up in this area. Now, back at the beginning of August, so let's rewind the clock 2 weeks. When I was forecasting for this same time period, this was not showing up as cold as it is now. So the model trend has been to cool this region. And it cooled it a bit faster than we forecast earlier in the month. My forecast for the month of August was for much of the United States to see near average, maybe a slight warm bias. Where that particular forecast is going to bust is going to be especially right in this area where we saw some cooler air arrive sooner than originally predicted. So I just want to be honest and transparent about some forecasting mistakes we have there. But I think the bigger picture on people's minds right now kind of deals with this map. So this is what I did. I went out and I looked at all of the weather that we've had, the recorded weather we've had since June 1st, and I took it up until yesterday. I'm then going to add to that climatologically average highs and lows across the United States all the way to October 15th. Now, why October 15th? Well, October 15th is the general first frost date for the area that I circled here. And as you move toward the north central plains, we basically lose, a week at a time as you just step like this in terms of our first frost date. So for some folks there in the Dakotas and northern Minnesota and parts of Montana, first frost date may be in the middle of September. Now, the reason why we're doing this analysis is because of the June 1st planted date part of this map. So here's what I'm showing you. For those that are growing corn, if we planted corn on June 1st or later, anywhere that you see color on this map is where 95-day maturity corn doesn't get to black layer by October 15th. And what I want to say here is that if you continue this analysis, this is 95-day corn, this is 100-day corn, this is 105-day corn, and this is 110-day corn. You see, the thing that we're thinking about here is that if we just even have a normal first frost date, we have a lot of our crop in the midsection of the United States in the north central plains that is going to be in deficit of growing degree day units. That's what's color-coded here, the deficit by that point, given the certain maturity corn that was planted. So even if you don't listen to the rest of this video, the main point behind this is that we are not getting the heat in the forecast that we would need to help this crop get to where we want it to get. And that's simply because of the setup of the Pacific Ocean jet stream and what we're doing with some of the cooler air that's tucked away in Canada, allowing it to advance toward the central part of the United States. Okay? So I'm going to let this keep going. We just had released yesterday the new long-range European model. So this now takes us out 6 weeks. So what we're going to look at now is September 3rd through the 10th, and the model's hanging on to its cooler bias in this area. Now, this isn't showing up super cold. It's just saying, hey, we're keeping that cooler air around. It's maybe what we don't see. We're going to have to watch for trends once we get into the middle part of September in the model, trends in the model, to see if they continue with this cooler swath here through the Canadian prairies and north central United States, or if they trend warmer. The last 2 model runs have trended cooler. And even taking you out here from the 10th through the 17th, we just don't see the rebound in major heat just yet. And what I want to do for the last part of this video is to make a case as to why I think the atmosphere is behaving this way. So all the way out to the end of September, we continue to see the warmth really in this area and over this area, and not so much in between. Okay, that is kind of the pattern we're currently seeing. We're going to have to watch this carefully together. Now, I know that a lot of times we like to think about our major teleconnections, our big drivers like El Nino. And when you look at this, you'd say, wow, this is really behaving in a very El Nino-like way. What do I mean? Well, over here on the left, I have August and September correlation with El Nino, which typically means when there is a big El Nino, we tend to keep this area around the Great Lakes states and the North Central Plains and East Coast, what we tend to keep it cool with a lot of warmth out here along the western part of the United States. But what's interesting is that right now our Southern Oscillation Index has been increasing since the end of July. And when the Southern Oscillation Index is positive, that's more indicative of La Nina-like conditions. And when it's near 0, which is here, well, that's certainly indicative of neither El Nino or La Nina. In addition to that, Take a look over here at the maps on the right first. We've been talking about the cooler water that has emerged here. We've even seen cooling in the Central Pacific as well. In fact, in Nino region 3.4, which is tucked away right in through here, I'll draw a box around it, we've actually now got our ocean temperatures that are right down here. Well, they're right on average or even slightly below at this time, after bumbling along for a while here through June and July in these very weak conditions. Now, as the atmosphere response to this, robust, well, wherever you look at this diagram on the left, just remember that the Central Pacific, this area, I'll just circle it kind of broadly here, is this area right in through here. Wherever you see the blues, well, back on August 10th, we had a big easterly wind burst here, so this is very indicative of La Nina. And overall, when you just look right in through here, do you see with me kind of a mixture of the blues and the reds? So what am I trying to say here? I'm trying to say that the atmosphere is not really behaving as if El Nino was our dominant signal. If it was, we would also see the upper levels of the atmosphere more conducive to rising motion in this area and more conducive to sinking motion over here. That's very normal for this time of year, the correlation between what happens in the upper levels of the atmosphere. This is what we've had so far in August. We see a different pattern over South America and Central America. Much of our upper level, motion is kind of centered here in the North Pacific. Now, why bring all this up in this video? Well, this is what we know, okay? It's mid to late summer. Teleconnections in summer, what are teleconnections again? Like, what are the connections between El Nino and the Pacific Decadal Oscillation and all these other oscillations we talk about all the time? Well, in summertime, because the flow of the atmosphere is weak, the flow of the jet stream is weak, the teleconnections are weak as well. What we do know, the North Pacific has been much warmer than average, and I've been addressing that in several videos. We call that the positive phase of the Pacific Decadal Oscillation. Yes, it's a teleconnection, and it should be weak, but what's interesting is we right now have the positive phase of that's that warm water in the North Pacific. At the same time, we've faded out temperatures along the equator, and that is a very rare setup. Now, what has been the result of this pattern is what's more important. Over the last 30 days, we have allowed colder air, this is the last 30 days, temperature anomalies here, colder air to set up from just to the east of Alaska all the way down into parts of, the central United States. And I'm showing you that in two ways. This is from a data set called CDAS, and over here we have from PRISM. They both show, now PRISM's only the US, but they both show that same thing with the heat in Texas, but the cooler pattern just to its north, right in through here. Now, what's got us set up there? Well, it's been this persistent pattern with a blocking ridge over Greenland and that high over low flow in Alaska. We've had a hard time to break that down. Now, if we want an extension on this growing season, here's what we need to do. We need to keep the jet stream weak and north. It's got to do that. So if you want something to be watching with me in the coming weeks, to be discussing what is the potential for an early frost, to be discussing are we going to get the heat we need to finish the season, it's going to be keeping that jet stream weak and north to prevent the frost and to extend the growing season. We need to keep the snow cover in Canada near average or below average. And just want to show you right now where we have snow across the northern hemisphere here, we're starting to bring it in right in through this area. But that's actually very climatologically normal at this point. So I'm not pointing to this as being a major wild card. If we want to get this extension in the growing season, we have got to get rid of the two big ridges that seem to be flanking North America. What I mean, I'll draw it down here on this map. Remember, you saw that the pattern was doing something a bit more like this, right? So we've got to get rid of this ridge and this ridge, actually get them about 180 degrees out of phase so that we can get a decent ridge setting up in the middle section of the country. And we got to shake off that trough that keeps setting up right here, because that trough is what sets up the downstream flow to feature another trough coming into this part of the U.S. Finally, I want to keep that El Nino signal very, very weak, and I want to remove any influences of the large warm blob on the flow of the jet stream. So if you noticed, I haven't really taken you out too far into the forecast other than about the next 3 to 5 weeks. And that's because these factors are not really well represented, I think, at this point in our longer range forecast. I think that the forecast models are battling against persistence, and the teleconnections being so weak this time of year make predictability at the end of summer quite challenging. We throw into that a bunch of wild cards. For example, we just had Chantel show up over here. This is not going to be a system that impacts the United States, but we do need to be watching what is coming off of the west coast of Africa here in the coming days. We need to be paying attention to the two systems. We got the one coming out of the Bay of Campeche here, the second one that's coming here, neither of which are expected to become hurricanes or even tropical storms, but they're still tropical pulses here because we are moving toward the climatological peak of hurricane season. And finally, we have to care about the Western Pacific. And the reason we have to be concerned about tropical systems in the Western Pacific is because as they get absorbed into the jet stream flow, they could reinforce troughing over the Aleutian Islands, which helps the pattern that we've currently had persist. So this video is about what you need to be watching with me over the coming days and weeks as we move into a vital time period here with respect to weather conditions as we move toward harvest. So with that, I'll go ahead and wrap up this forecast video. We at Nutrien Ag Solutions, thank you for your attention. Hope you look forward to our next long-range forecast coming out next week. Have a great end of your week, and we'll talk to you again soon. Thank you.